Following the murder of rapper Biggie Smalls in Los Angeles in 1997, rumors began spreading that law enforcement officers, possibly from the NYPD, had him under surveillance at the time, and that they had witnessed the shooting and then either remained silent or even helped cover it up. And over the years, this has grown into a bit of an urban legend. Now, I've pieced together multiple pieces of evidence scattered throughout the case files, of which there are thousands of documents and probably 100 plus hours of witness interviews, and I think I've figured out the source of these claims. And it starts with a simple question. Was Biggie under police surveillance in Los Angeles in the days leading up to his murder? And the answer may surprise you, because the answer is yes. Now, Biggie had multiple run-ins with the law in the years prior to his death. He dealt drugs and done some petty crimes in his earlier years, which he then rapped about. More recently, in July of 1996, a cop responding to his home in New Jersey over a report about a car parked illegally in a red zone turned into a huge police raid after that cop smelled marijuana smoke coming from the home. That raid uncovered drugs and weapons, drugs being marijuana. There were other investigations. I don't want to rehash all of it. It's been well covered in the media over the years, and I don't want to seem like I'm beating up on Biggie. But for our purposes, the point is that he was on law enforcement's radar at the time of his death. So, who was in LA watching Biggie? Our first clue comes from his own entourage, and an incident that happened outside the Soul Train Music Awards at LA's Shrine Auditorium the night before Biggie was murdered. Biggie and Puffy and some of their entourage are inside the award show where Biggie is presenting an award. Outside, some members of their security detail and their drivers are waiting for them to come back out. They reportedly were inside the venue for about 90 minutes. During this time, a local cop suddenly appears and warns bad boy security standing outside with their vehicles that there are cops across the street who have them under surveillance. Now, when I first came across this, I thought, that seems kind of sketchy. Why would one cop rat out other cops and potentially blow their operation? It sounded kind of shady to me. But then I got the other side of the story, and it took some digging. In every investigation, there's a document called the chrono, which is short for chronological record. It's like a journal where detectives make daily entries noting what work they did on the case that day. It lists everything from interviewing witnesses to printing flyers. In one of the first chrono entries for the Biggie murder case, on March 9th, 1997, at 12:30 p.m., there is an entry that one of the detectives on the case was contacted by an LAPD sergeant claiming that the NYPD had been conducting an ongoing investigation of what they refer to as the decedent, who was Biggie. Now, this information is coming in only about 12 hours after the shooting happened. So this is very, very early in the investigation that they get this first tip. And then buried in the chrono for the RHD detectives who eventually took over Biggie's case a few weeks later, and these detectives included Russell Poole, the famous or infamous detective in this case, depending on your point of view. And this entry was on April 17th, 1997, so about 5 weeks after Biggie's murder. And here's where we learn exactly what happened outside the Shrine Auditorium during the Soul Train Music Awards. An LAPD gang detective is on duty in the South Bureau Division on the night of the award show when he gets a page from a sergeant who is on duty working overtime at the award show. This sergeant at the award show has been contacted there by an NYPD detective and an IRS agent who are working a task force outside the Shrine Auditorium. It turns out the IRS agent was a special agent with the Department of the Treasury, and the NYPD detective was named Detective Oldham, and he worked with their major case squad. So this LAPD gang detective gets this tip from the sergeant at the award show, and he decides he's going to go down there himself to the shrine to locate these two detectives from New York and find out what's going on. Because apparently the LAPD isn't aware that there's an operation happening, or at least this detective, hasn't been made aware of it. So this LAPD gang detective finds the detectives from New York outside the award show, and he sees that they're taking surveillance photos. And when he looks to see who they're photographing, he sees Bad Boy's security team waiting around their vehicles outside the venue. And he notices that some of them have bulges in their jackets, indicating that they may be armed. And then he recognizes one of them. He recognizes Inglewood police officer Reggie Blaylock. And Blaylock would end up being a witness to Biggie's murder the following night. He was driving the third SUV with Bad Boy's head of security, Paul Offord, that was behind Biggie's Suburban when the shooting happened. They're the ones who chased after the shooter but lost him. So this gang detective spots Blaylock standing outside the Shrine Auditorium, recognizes him as an officer with the Inglewood Police Department. And what this detective does next inadvertently changes music history forever. He decides, hey, if these detectives from New York are about to make an arrest of the suspect that they're tracking, then this is a potential officer safety situation. And Blaylock and any other officers who may be working security for Bad Boy need to be informed. They need to know about it. What if the suspect resists and there's an altercation, and in the middle of it you have plainclothes officers from New York and you have plainclothes officers from LA doing security, and they're all armed and they don't know who each other is or what's happening? It could turn into a total catastrophe. So this LA gang detective approaches Bad Boy's security team outside the Shrine and, quote, as an officer safety issue, the detective advised Inglewood PD officer Blaylock of the NYPD intentions. So he warns Blaylock about what may be about to go down, just to make sure that he's safe. And then it turns into a scene from like a cop movie. At some point in the evening, Puffy sees the NYPD detective, and Puffy waves at the NYPD detective. And the NYPD detective waves back. Technically, it says they wave at each other as if they know each other. I wonder if it was kind of a cocky move by Puff to be like, "What's up?" to the New York detectives, and the detectives were like, damn it. So did someone tip off Puff about what this LA gang detective had just told them about the New York detectives watching? Or did he and his group already know about it? Regardless, everybody goes their separate ways, and the New York detectives in their surveillance. And essentially, their operation has been blown. Whoever was the subject of their surveillance now knows that they're being watched. Now, there's one more interesting piece of evidence supporting this story, and it comes from a surprising source. A former shot caller for the Southside Crips in Compton named Keefe D. If you've seen my documentary Murder Rap, then you may remember a moment where Keefe D approached Biggie's table at the Peterson Museum the following night, and in that moment, Keefe claimed that he offered them extra security. And this is how that conversation went, according to him.
He said the FBI is all over me, man. I don't want you guys catching my heat. Stay away from me.
Who said that?
Sean.
Oh, shit. Combs said FBI is all over me?
Yes.
So, what happens next? Well, it turns out the original Wilshire Division detectives had already spoken with Detective Oldham from the NYPD back on March 13th, just 4 days after the murder. And they were told by Detective Oldham, who had done the surveillance at the Soul Train Music Awards, that he had left LA around 3 or 4 on Saturday afternoon, which was only about 9 hours before Biggie's murder. But he adds that 2 of his partners stayed behind. But he's adamant that they, quote, were not at the museum the night of the homicide. So what's going on? Where does all of this leave us? Well, here's my theory. If Bad Boy Security and Biggie and all of them know about the surveillance, then it's a safe bet that their whole entourage eventually found out about it, either that night at the awards show or in the days that followed. Maybe they don't know specifically what agency was doing it, but they know agents from New York were watching them. So they've got that in their mind. They were being watched. Then, during interviews with detectives working Biggie's case, some witnesses were shown images from the Peterson Museum that I think some of them interpreted to be surveillance photos of Bad Boy's entourage leaving the party moments before Biggie was shot. Well, I don't think they were surveillance photos. I think they were video stills. And here's why. The LAPD detectives found out about the home video filmed across the street from the Peterson after someone called in following an episode of America's Most Wanted about the Biggie case. And the video had been shot by tourists from Houston. So the LAPD detectives get a copy of this videotape from the Houston Police Department. And these detectives have screenshots from the video printed out to make it easier to show witnesses key moments and individuals captured in the footage. Here are some bad photocopies of stills from this video that are in the case file. So, I think these video stills, combined with the knowledge that they'd been under surveillance the night before at the award show, combined with the fact that detectives also showed witnesses some actual surveillance photos taken by the New York detectives at the award show the night before, led some people to falsely conclude that agents had been present when the murder happened and had captured it on film. Incidentally, years later, Detective Oldham would co-write a book called The Brotherhoods, and this book was about a different case that he worked, but in it he briefly mentions the story about infiltrating the Soul Train Music Awards in 1997, and that he did it by posing as a photographer at the event. And he says in the book that he flew home the following afternoon, just hours before Biggie's murder, because he was scheduled to testify in a gang case back in Brooklyn. Had he not flown home that day, he likely would have been at the Peterson the night of the murder. Earlier, I said the gang detective who tipped off Biggie's security about the surveillance at the award show had inadvertently changed music history forever. How? Well, what if that surveillance operation out of New York hadn't been blown that night at the award show? What if Detective Oldham's partners who were still in LA had continued the surveillance operation the following night? They very likely would have been stationed outside the Peterson Museum when the murder happened. They very possibly would have photos of the suspect and his vehicle, or they could have even chased him down themselves. Or the killer might have made them and decided not to go through with it. Biggie may not have been shot at all. This story is full of existential questions like this. And they always make you wonder how easily things could have gone a different way.